Automated Accessibility Testing in JavaScript Frameworks, presented by Mark Stedman. Ali Bytes, 2021.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Automated Accessibility Testing in JavaScript Frameworks. My name is Mark Stedman. I'm a developer consultant at Deque Systems. I work with multiple companies through Deque to work on accessibility remediation issues and to help with Axe core integrations into testing environments. So let's get started. Accessibility testing in general in what we're talking about today, we're talking about accessibility testing with Axe core in JavaScript framework. So what is Axe core? Axe core is an accessibility test engine that is fast, secure, lightweight, and is built to seamlessly integrate with any existing testing environment. It contains 90 different accessibility checks. It can catch up to 57.6% of accessibility violations by volume. It can help maintain a baseline accessible framework. And what's great about it is it can be used as a tool to help create accessible developers. But also to add a little bit more on top of that, not just that, to talk about web testing in general, right? To kind of frame this conversation, we have to know what the levels of test are too. So the levels of test in general are functional component testing, which is each individual web component is tested for functionality and overall purpose, which is one part of JavaScript frameworks is actually componentizing our content and our web content. Integration testing, which is each individual web page fully rendered, is tested for full functionality and overall purpose. There's end-to-end testing, which is similar to integration testing. However, it's more in a flow-like manner or crawling space. There's critical flow testing, which is a specific data-driven flow that is critical to a web user and is tested for its full functionality. So why are we here? Why are we talking about JavaScript framework? Why is it testing different? Well, JavaScript frameworks run into issues in general in isolation because components are tested in isolation, right? And that's not just accessibility testing, that's just JavaScript testing or JavaScript framework testing in general, right? So in order to effectively test for accessibility violations in an automated way, you must hit multiple levels of test. If you cannot hit multiple levels of test, you run the risk of issues still appearing on your site when it's fully rendered together. And you also run the risk of those issues continuing to show up over time, over and over again, right? So to deal with this and kind of showcase this, I can talk about all I want, but it's really good to see it one time. When you see it kind of put together, you say, aha, have that aha moment with it. So here's the scenario. We're using a React application, right? And we're going to focus on one single component in this React application, right? It's going to be a data input component. And so to test that component, we're going to use Jest with React Testing Library, okay, for our component functional testing. And for our integration testing, we build out the React application. We're going to use Selenium WebDriver.js to see those components tested on the page over there, okay? So my component, my actual form component, in this case here, it's called data input. And the data input basically has a fragment, which is React's way of just letting you have no div inside there. It takes a label. The label has no attributes tied to it. An input with the attributes type, class name, and ID, right? So it's just a simple label input combination for the page. And again, this scenario I'm showing you is actually one that I've lived through myself, working with multiple people going through different React applications. These things exist, and this is actually real world examples. So how would I test this, right? So I go into my actual Jest test case, I import Axe core, right? And what I do is I make a test case in Jest called accessibility check. I'm basically going to say a const and say, hey, I want the container from the render part, which is from React Testing Library, to take that data input. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run axe.run on that container object, which is the raw HTML. And I'm going to expect the results, that violations.length from the callback of this to be 0, right? I would expect there to be no violations to come back from this, right? And initially when I run this the first time, I'm actually going to have an accessibility issue, which says form elements must have labels. Oh, that's true, right? In that first snippet I showed you, I didn't have any attributes to tie the input to the label. So let's go to that, right? Let's go back and let's make the changes. So now the label has an ID of data input label, and the input now has aria label equals data input label. So when I rerun my test case that I saw before, guess what? I'm going to have 0 accessibility violations. Fantastic, right? That means it's 100% accessible, correct? Maybe not so much. So think about it like this. When I do component and functional testing, this is the outcome. Whenever you look at testing, there's always 3 main things that come out of it. There's action, there's a goal, and there's a result. So if I do component testing only, the action is I test my components at Axe core. The goal, to ensure that all those components are accessible to the customers. The result, though, if I only do component testing, why does QA still see automated issues when testing, even though we're testing each component, they're 100% accessible, right? I can make 100% accessible components. However, when those components start to interact on the same page, I'm missing a step from accessibility testing, right? From an automated perspective. And that's where having a second level of integration testing helps out. So let's take a look now at the component, the data input component we talked about that would be used on a page. So this is an example of it being used within another page itself within React. So it's a page component in React. So I have a div, and inside that div, I have 4 instances of a tag that's called data input, which is that component, with an input label attribute, which is the label that it gets associated with the actual data input, right? And so now on the actual page that I have, when I go into my test case, which my test case now is using React scripts to build out the whole project for me, and now it's ready to go. I'm using Selenium WebDriver JS. So in this case here, we actually have an Axe integration for that. So Axe WebDriver JS, and what we do is before the test case runs, we take the actual the driver itself, we wrap it with Axe Core, which allows Axe Core to get integrated into or injected into the page that you're testing against. So when I go to the local host link there, I can actually then scan it for accessibility issues. So I create a test case that says is accessible. I create an object called results, and that results object is equal to axedriver.analyze, which then scans the page like you saw before, similar to axe.run, and will give you the results back from it. And in this case here, I would expect the results.violations.length to be 0 again, right? I expect there to be no issues. Now, let's take a look at what the actual results are. Whoa. So wait a minute, I just tested my component. It should have no issues, right? Well, why do I have 2 accessibility issues specifically for that component on the page? Well, I have IDs of active elements must be unique. Duplicate ID. Oh, that's right. I used ARIA label by for the same ID that I hard coded on the label. Going to be a major accessibility issue, right? And also, that label has the same ID over and over again. That's duplicate IDs, right? It's hard for a screen reader to parse that stuff. So right away, I have 2 more accessibility issues that if I only did component testing and said, yeah, I have a false sense of security and say it's good to go, boom, I have accessibility issues from an integration standpoint. So the next question I usually get asked is, Mark, let's say I do just integration testing. Like you're making it sound like I could just do integration testing. I'll catch the other thing I caught in the component testing at that time. Okay, that's a perfectly valid argument. So let's try it real quick. Let's use the three steps of testing. So integration testing only. My action. I test my page content or my end-to-end flow with Axe, right? 57.6% accessibility violation. So I go to goal. My goal is to ensure my customer-facing content has no accessibility issues. All right, I'm 2 for 2. The result. Well, how do we keep seeing the same issues over and over again on our automated scans? Aha, that's where the multiple levels of tests comes into play. So if I am only testing a component, right, I will miss the integration pieces of it when the actual interactions of a full page. If I only do integration testing, right, what ends up happening is yes, I will get those same issues. However, at a component level, when I'm creating within that same React application, I've not made a standard on my team that anytime I make a new component or something that's new to the actual content that's there, right, any updates to old components, that it needs to be checked for accessibility using the actual Axe Core testing, right? So in that case, I don't have any accessibility standards on my development team day to day. So if I'm developing with somebody else, they check in code and I can see that, that's not happening. So basically, if somebody new comes to the team, they don't know accessibility standard, and guess what they're going to do? Check in bad code. It's going to go out to production. You're going to get to the integration testing, and it's going to show up, right? Multiple levels of tests are needed in order to ensure that it doesn't do that. So bringing it all together, using multiple levels of tests will help development teams ensure their components are accessible when put together onto a page. Ensure your components will continue to be accessible as your developers create new content, and it will create an accessibility-aware development team from creation to testing that makes accessibility important in the day-to-day development process. And that's the biggest goal, is we want to make accessibility more important in development day-to-day. And that's what doing multiple levels of tests using something like Axe Core to test your content will do, is it'll make accessibility testing part of your day-to-day process and help create more accessible content. Thank you very much. I hope this is extremely useful. I really do want any and all of you to reach out to me if you can. My Twitter is on the screen at Steady5063, and my LinkedIn is on there as well, Mark-Steady. Thank you again very much. I hope this was useful, and have a great Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Ali Bytes 2021.